Yugoslavia is a name that to some is the Frankenstein creation and the byproduct of the death of two empires. To some it holds fond memories of sun, sea and sand. The youth among us may never have heard of this once great Baltic country. But to some of us it brings memories of war, death, destruction and genocide. Hi everybody and welcome back to the Dark Histories podcast. Hope everybody is well. I'm Rob, your host as always. In episode 2, we're going to look at the former country of Yugoslavia. Up until recently, the wars that were fought here were the last fought on European soil. This is going to be another in a long line of grim tales from Europe, but it's up there with some of the most despicable and deplorable stories that have come out of this allegedly civilized continent. Please don't judge me on the pronunciations in this. I'm going to murder quite a few of them, so I apologise in advance. So without further ado, please sit back and relax for more dark history. There has been 3 federations of Balkan nations called Yugoslavia. The first originated in the aftermath of the Balkans War and World War I. At the end of the 19th century, the 2 empires which previously dominated the region, Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans, began to undergo changes and retreats respectively, sparking discussions among intellectuals and political leaders about the creation of a united South Slav nation. The question of who would dominate this was a matter of contention, be it a Greater Serbia or a Greater Croatia. The origins of Yugoslavia may partly lay in the Illyrian movement of the mid-19th century. As World War I raged in 1914, the Yugoslav Committee was formed in Rome by Balkan exiles in order to come up with and agitate for a solution to key questions, such as what states would be created if the allies of Britain, France and Serbia managed to defeat the Austro-Hungarians, especially as Serbia looked on the verge of destruction. In 1915, the committee moved to London, where it had an effect on Allied politicians far greater than its size. Although funded by Serbian money, the committee, comprised mainly of Slovenes and Croats, was against a Greater Serbia, and argued for an equal union, although they conceded that as Serbia was the state which did exist, and which had all the apparatus for a government, the new South Slav state would have to be coalescent around it. In 1917, a rival South Slav group formed from disputes in the Austro-Hungarian government, who argued for a union of Croats, Slovenes and Serbs in a newly reworked and federated Austrian-led empire. The Serbs and the Yugoslav Committee then went further, signing on an agreement to push the creation of an independent kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes under the Serb kings, including land currently in Austria-Hungary. As the latter collapsed under the pressure of war, a national council of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes was declared to rule Austria-Hungary's former Slavs, and this pushed for a union with Serbia. This decision was taken in no small part to rid the area of marauding bands of Italians, deserters and Habsburg troops. The Allies agreed to the creation of a combined South Slav state and basically told the rival groups to form one. Negotiations followed, in which the National Council gave in to Serbia and the Yugoslav Committee, allowing Prince Alexander to declare the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes on December 1st, 1918. At this point, the devastated and disjointed region was only held together by the army, and bitter rivalries had to be dampened down before borders were set. A new government was formed in 1921, and a new constitution was voted in. In addition, In 1919, the Communist Party of Yugoslavia formed, which received a large number of votes, but refused to join the chambers and committed assassinations, getting itself banned. 10 years of political infighting between the many different parties followed, largely because the kingdom was dominated by Serbs, who had expanded their governing structure to run it rather than anything new. Consequently, King Alexander I shut the parliament and created a royal dictatorship. He renamed the country Yugoslavia, which literally means Land of the South Slavs, and created a new regional division trying to negate the growth of nationalist rivalry. Alexander would be assassinated on October 9, 1934, while visiting Paris, by a Ustasha affiliate. If you haven't heard about the Ustasha, go and read about them. This was a group of Croats who the Nazis thought were too violent. Honestly, there will be an episode about this, but just go and have a look at it, it's mental. The First Yugoslavia lasted until the Second World War, when Axis forces invaded in 1941. The Regency had been moving closer to Hitler, but an anti-Nazi coup brought the government down and the wrath of Germany onto them. War ensued, but not one as simple as pro-Axis versus anti-Axis, as communists, nationalists, royalists, fascists and other factions all fought in what was effectively a civil war. The three key groups were the fascist Ustasha, the royalist Chetniks, and the communist partisans. As the Second World War was concluded, it was partisan leader Josip Broz Tito, who was backed at the end by the Red Army unit, who emerged in control, and a second Yugoslavia was formed. This was a federation of 6 republics, each supposedly equal: Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Slovenia, Macedonia and Montenegro, as well as 2 autonomous provinces within Serbia, Kosovo and Vojvodina. Once the war was won, mass executions and purges targeted collaborators and enemy fighters. Tito's state was initially highly centralised and allied to the USSR, but Tito and Stalin argued. The former survived and forged his own path, developing power and gaining assistance from the Western powers. He was, if not universally regarded, then at least for a time admired for the way Yugoslavia was progressing, but it was with Western aid, designed to keep him away from Russia, that probably saved his country. The political history of the Second Yugoslavia is basically a struggle between the centralised government and the demands for devolving powers for the members' units, a balancing act that produced 3 constitutions and multiple changes over this period. By the time of Tito's death, Yugoslavia was essentially hollow, with deep economic problems and barely concealed nationalisms, all held together by the cult of Tito's personality and the party. Yugoslavia may well have collapsed under him if he had lived. Throughout his rule, Tito had to tie the federation together against growing nationalism. After his death, these focuses began to increase rapidly and tore Yugoslavia apart. Following the death of the autocratic leader in 1980, the Yugoslav Federation found itself in crisis, with bickering between the ethnic groups and surging nationalist sentiments. By the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, inter-ethnic relations in Yugoslavia were at breaking point. By the time 1990 came around, the first multi-party elections were held, with nationalists winning most of them. The most prosperous republics, Slovenia and Croatia, started to advocate a greater decentralisation from Yugoslavia's government. But the largest republic, Serbia, led by Slobodan Milosevic, rallied fellow Serbs throughout Yugoslavia to push the centralised control. The first of 6 republics to formally leave Yugoslavia was Slovenia, declaring independence on the 25th of June 1991. This would trigger an intervention from the Yugoslav People's Army, or the JNA, which turned into a brief military conflict, generally referred to as the 10 Days War. The war in Slovenia was both short and relatively bloodless, although 44 Yugoslav army soldiers and officers. The real tragedy of the Slovenian War was that it made the preservation of a Yugoslav state, or its peaceful dissolution, highly improbable. After the collapse of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia in 1990, the People's Army was ostensibly the last Yugoslav institution. While a number of Slovenian officers continued to serve in the army in 1991, it would soon cease to be the Yugoslav army. By early 1992, it had become the de facto Serbian army. Unfortunately, the Slovenian 10-Day War would be the exception to the rule when it came to wars in Yugoslavia. Croatians declared their independence the same day as Slovenia after a referendum. The sizable Serb minority in Croatia did not accept this referendum and founded the Serbian Republic of Krajina. While Slovenians' withdrawal from the Yugoslav Federation was comparatively bloodless, Croatia's was not. The independence push started on the 13th of May 1990, when a football match between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade turned into riots. The incident took place just 2 weeks after Croatia's first multi-party elections in almost 50 years, in which the parties favouring Croatian independence had won the majority votes under Franjo Tudman. The riots resulted in over 60 people wounded, including some stabbed, shot, or poisoned by tear gas. The conflict escalated into an armed incident in majority Serb areas. The Serbs attacked Croatian police units in Pakrac in early March 1991, while one Josip Jovic was widely reported as the first police officer killed by Serb forces as part of the war during the Plitvice Lake incident in late March 1991. By late 1991, the war was in full swing. The Serbs attacked large Croatian cities like Dubrovnik. An important event was the Battle of Vukovar in August 1991, where the Yugoslav army besieged a Croatian city. As the Yugoslavs took more and more Croatian territory, they exhausted the Croatian armies. A particularly nefarious event happened on the 20th of November 1991 in Vukovar. During the waning days of the battle, the evacuation of the Vukovar hospital was negotiated between Croatian authorities, the JNA, and the European Community Monetary Mission in cooperation with the International Committee of the Red Cross. The JNA subsequently refused the ICRC's access to the hospital despite the agreement and removed approximately 300 people from the premises. The group largely consisting of Croats, but also included Serbs, Hungarians, Muslims and 2 foreign nationals who fought on the side of the Croatian National Guard, was initially transported to the JNA barracks in Vukovar. Several prisoners were identified as hospital staff and removed from the group to be returned to the hospital, while the rest of them were transported to the Ovkara farm south of Vukovar. Once at the farm, the prisoners were beaten for several hours before the JNA pulled its troops from the site, leaving the prisoners in the custody of Croatian Serb TOs and the Serbian paramilitaries. The prisoners were then taken to a prepared site, shot in groups of 10 or 20, and buried in a mass grave. This massacre wouldn't be the first or the last. Massacres occurred in Lovas, which saw 70 people killed. The Erdut massacre saw 37 people murdered, and the Gossip and Skrabna massacres saw a combined total of around 200 people killed. On January 2nd, 1992, a ceasefire was signed in Croatia with the help of the United Nations, and the Yugoslav army gradually abandoned Croatian cities. On January 15th, 1992, the International Committee recognised Croatia's independence. However, this was not to be the end of the war. The Yugoslav People's Army took thousands of prisoners during the war in Croatia and interred them in camps in Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro. The Croatian forces also captured some Serbian prisoners, and the two sides agreed to several prisoner exchanges. Most prisoners were freed by the end of 1992. But the pleasantries didn't last though. By 1993, Serbs violated the agreement, and every subsequent agreement until Operation Storm by continuing ground, artillery and air attacks against Croatia. A total of 10,000 Croatian civilians were killed. 30,000 were disabled, which included 4,000 children, and almost 300,000 were ethnically cleansed, with another 100,000 displaced by fleeing to areas out of Serbian artillery and mortars. An additional 400 sick and elderly Croats were killed by Serbian police, paramilitaries, and civilians in areas occupied by Serbian terrorists during the UN presence. Not a single investigation was launched by Serbian authorities. Croats are barred from returning, and Serbs repeatedly refused peace negotiations for separate non-Serb returnings. In 1995, Croatia launched two major offences against Krasnija, which controlled more than a quarter of Croatia. Croatia ended the war by destroying the Republic of Serbian Krasnija, and it succeeded both in obtaining independence and preserving its borders. Approximately 21 to 25% of Croatia's economy was ruined, with an estimated $37 billion in damaged infrastructure, loss output, and refugee-related costs. Over 20,000 people were killed in the war, and refugees were displaced on both sides. Then we come to one of the worst wars in modern history, and that is the Bosnian War. Bosnia held a referendum on independence slightly later than the fellow Yugoslavian states. The referendum was held in February of 1992, with 99.7% of voters voting yes. The Bosnian Serb leadership boycotted the referendum to prevent independence, but independence was officially declared on the 1st of March 1992, and internationally recognised by April 1992. Shortly after the referendum, Serb forces seized the city of Sarajevo, which would lead to a 4-year-long campaign of terror and persecution. From May 1992, Bosnian Serb forces under the command of General Ratko Mladic used shelling and sniping to target civilian areas of the city and key institutions, killing, wounding, and inflicting terror upon the civilian population. During this time, almost all the Sarajevo's cultural, religious, and residential buildings were either partially or completely destroyed. The siege of Sarajevo resulted in over 11,000 people killed, of which 1,600 were just children. From January to March 1993, the Bosnian Serb forces attacked the Srpska area in eastern Bosnia. Thousands of Muslims fled to the UN safe area of Srebrenica and Zapa in the hopes of finding safety. Thereafter, Bosnian Serb forces began to focus particular attention on capturing the strategically located Srebrenica and Zapa enclaves and expelling the Bosnian Muslim population that had fled there in the wake of the 1992 and 1993 ethnic cleansing campaigns in eastern Bosnia-Herzegovina. These Bosniak Muslims in towns such as Visegrad, Prajedor, Foka, Gorzad, Srebrenica, and many others were subjected to vast crimes against humanity, forcible deportations, murder, and torture. On the 8th of March 1995, Radovan Karadzic, the political leader of the Bosnian Serb forces, ordered the Serb forces to eliminate the Muslim enclaves of Srebrenica and Zepa. By the 2nd of July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces attacked the Srebrenican enclave. This attack on the enclave continued until the 11th of July 1995, when Ratko Mladic and the Bosnian Serb forces entered Srebrenica. Subsequently, those Bosnian Serb forces terrorised Bosnian Muslims, who were forcibly transferred to areas outside of the enclave, and many of whom fled in huge columns through the woods towards Sula, which was a free territory. The vast majority of this group consisted of civilians. Over 7,000 Bosnian Muslim prisoners captured in the areas around Srebrenica were executed on the 13th of July to the 19th of July 1995. This would become the largest massacre in Europe since World War II in any one such area. From August 1995 to November 1995, Bosnian Serb forces participated in an organised and comprehensive effort to conceal the killings and executions of the Bosnian Muslims of Srebrenica by digging up and reburying, in isolated locations, the bodies from the mass graves. Bodies are still being identified using complex DNA techniques today. 8,372 people were killed at Srebrenica, with more than 1,000 of the victims' bodies still sadly unaccounted for. In December 1995, US-led negotiations in Daytona, Ohio, also known as the Daytona Peace Accord, ended the conflict in Bosnia, and a force was created to maintain the ceasefire. Since the end of the conflict, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia at The Hague has charged more than 160 persons. In the years following the peace agreement, the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo was reunified. The Muslims, Serbs and Croats elected leaders to serve on a 3-president committee, and Serbia and Bosnia restored diplomatic ties. Nevertheless, fighting between Muslims and Serbs broke out once again in November as Muslims attempted to return to their homes. The lingering conflicts were quieted by the UN peacekeepers, who would remain in the region until December 1998. Convictions have included Serbs, Croats and Bosniaks, though Serbians and Bosnian Serbs have faced the majority of charges. In 2001, former President Milosevic was captured, but he died in his cell in 2006. Radovan Karadzic, the supreme commander of the Bosnian Serb Armed Forces, was captured in 2008 and is being tried in The Hague on genocide charges. Ratko Mladic, Chief of Staff of the Bosnian Serb Army, was captured in 2011 and was charged with 11 counts, including genocide and crimes against humanity. The Bosnian War and genocide resulted in close to 100,000 civilians killed, over 2 million people forcibly displaced, and between 20,000 to 50,000 women systematically raped, all due to their ethnic and religious identity. Following the war, more than 40,000 people were missing, and more than 3,000 mass graves have been uncovered containing their remains since 1995. The fragile peace in the Balkans, however, could not hold. In March 1998, less than 2.5 years after the Daytona Peace Accord was signed, the region was again plunged into conflict, with Milosevic, now the President of Yugoslavia, ordering the military to suppress pro-independence Albanians in the province of Kosovo in southern Yugoslavia. Although the government claimed that the crackdowns targeted only members of the Kosovo Liberation Army, an organisation dedicated to end the Serb authority in Kosovo through armed resistance, Albanians, as well as outside observers, reported that attacks had also targeted civilians. Widespread rape and sexual violence by the Serbian army, police and paramilitaries occurred during the conflict, and the majority of victims were Kosovo Albanian women, numbering an estimated 20,000. The crimes of rape by the Serbian military, paramilitaries and police amounted to crimes against humanity and a war crime for torture. On the 27th of April 1999, a mass execution of at least 377 Kosovo Albanian civilians, of whom 36 were under 18 years old, was committed by the Serbian police and the Yugoslav armed forces in the village of Meja near the town of Grozkova. It followed an operation which began after the killing of 6 Serbian policemen by the Kosovo Liberation Army. The victims were pulled from refugee convoys at the checkpoint in Meja, and their families were ordered to proceed to Albania. Men and boys were separated and then executed by the road. It was one of the largest massacres in the Kosovo War. Despite the imposition of economic sanctions by the US and the European Union, Serbian attack on the Albanians continued until military intervention by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1999 forced Milosevic to withdraw Serb forces from Kosovo. Unfortunately, tensions on the border between Kosovo and Serbia begin to rise today, and we could yet see more conflict between these two countries. One small exception to the rule was North Macedonia, or the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, as it was called by then. On the 8th of September 1991, a referendum claimed Macedonia's independence. Macedonia remained at peace throughout the Yugoslav War of the early 90s. A few very minor changes to borders with Yugoslavia were agreed upon to resolve problems with democratic lines between the two countries. Unfortunately, it was seriously destabilised by the Kosovo War in 1999, when an estimated 360,000 ethnic Albanian refugees from Kosovo took refuge in the country. They departed shortly after the war, and Albanian nationalists on both sides of the border took up arms soon after. This was in pursuit of autonomy or independence for the Albanian populationed areas in Macedonia. A conflict took place between the government and ethnic Albanian insurgents, mostly in the north and west of the country, between February and August 2001. The war ended with an intervention of a NATO ceasefire monitoring force. Under the terms of the Ohrid Agreement, the government agreed to devolve greater political power and cultural recognition to the Albanian minority. The Albanian side agreed to abandon separatist demands and to recognise all Macedonian institutions fully. In addition, according to this accord, the NLA were to disarm and hand over their weapons to the NATO forces. However, the Macedonian security forces had 2 more armed confrontations with Albanian militant groups in 2007 and 2015 respectively. Inter-ethnic tensions flared in Macedonia again in 2012, with incidents of violence between ethnic Albanians and Macedonians. In April 2017, a mob of Macedonian nationalists stormed the Macedonian parliament in response to the election of Talat Zafari, an ethnic Albanian and former National Liberation Army commander during the 2001 conflict, as a speaker to the assembly. But most of Macedonia's conflicts have been internal, none have been directly with Yugoslavia. Yeah, so that was the country of Yugoslavia. Civil wars are always horrific. All restraints disappear and people become numb to their own atrocities. All sides in the former Yugoslavia committed terrible acts upon the other. But there is one side who especially bore the brunt and another who brought it on them. This wasn't just Serbia. Every single country or group of people spilt blood in this conflict. Every side committed atrocities, and this clusterfuck of a war became so inhumane that the butchery became commonplace. Some estimates put the number of killings in the Yugoslav war at 140,000. The Humanitarian Law Centre estimated that in the conflict in former Yugoslavian Republic, at least 130,000 people lost their lives. Slovenia's involvement in the conflict was brief, thus avoiding high casualties, and around 70 people were killed in the 10 days conflict. The war in Croatia left an estimated 22,000 people dead, of which 15,000 were Croats and 7,000 were Serbs. Bosnia and Herzegovina suffered the heaviest burden of the fighting, between 97,207 and 102,662 people were killed in the wars, including 64,036 Bosniaks, 24,905 Serbs, and 7,788 Croats. By share, 65% of the killings were Bosniaks, 25% were Serbs, and 8% were Croats. In the Kosovo conflict, 13,535 people were killed, including 10,812 Albanians, which is 80%, and 2,195 Serbs, which is 16%. The highest death toll was in Sarajevo, with around 14,000 killed during the siege. The city lost almost as many people as the entire war in Kosovo, not to mention all the refugees that are normally a byproduct of war. Tensions in and around this area still burn to this day. We could see a return of armed conflict between Kosovo and Serbia this year. The tensions are somewhat overshadowed by the ongoing war in Ukraine, but nonetheless troops are on high alert on the borders. Anyway, if you like this episode, please drop us a review. It really helps the podcast out. If you think friends and family may like it, then share it with them. Links to TikTok, YouTube, Insta, the show email, and Twitter are below. If you've been listening for a while and not subscribed, please do that. In that way you never miss an episode. I also forget to mention that it's free. So, with all that out the way, please join me for episode 3 and more Dark History.